Welcome to Rebuilding the Artist, a podcast that explores the intersection of identity, creativity, and mental health in the arts. I'm your host, Rashida Black, a therapist and former musician, here to help you navigate the pressures and challenges of a world that often demands perfection at the cost of well-being. This podcast is about reclaiming your sense of self between all of the expectations and harsh self-talk. Whether you're an artist or supporting a creative, join us as we explore building resilience and living authentically. Hey, I'm Rashida, and I am so excited that you are here with me right now. That you are here joining me on this journey for my very first podcast, this very first episode. We have a lot to dive into, so let's get started. A lot of young people enter the arts through school programs like ensemble or band or drama club, and it's often a conscious decision to join something social, right? Something extracurricular. It's like, we all take math classes, but no 8-year-old is like, I'm an accountant. So the self-identity isn't formed for them around a specific activity. Usually, when it comes to most other areas. But that experience can be completely different for those of us who found the arts, especially those who found the arts outside of school curriculum. The arts for us becomes more than just a hobby. It becomes this whole outlet for what we're going through at home or what's happening in our minds. And it's not just the arts, right? Like, let's be real. Some kids, they get into sports too, just as a way to channel energy or emotions that either they don't know how to express, the adults in their life can't really teach them how to express, or this is just the way that the culture deals with that particular, energy, right? Like hyperactivity or aggression or shyness, right? And, let me just say, those activities, they can be amazing. Right? I'm still friends with people I, played music with when I was a kid. And I use the skills I learned as a musician every single day in my work now. But sometimes the line between loving what you do and feeling pressured to succeed at what you do gets a little blurry. Now, obviously, it's different, if your parents are professional artists. The world would be a worse place without Minnie Riperton and Maya Rudolph. Am I right? A high school friend of mine is an actor and the daughter of a brilliant conductor and musician. And my friend's son, still in his single digits, has absolute pitch. I'll receive these little singing happy birthday messages that are like amazing, right? Give this kid a Grammy already. And even though I'm like, wow, right? This is astounding. Right? I don't want to be one of the only people who has this experience of being awed by such beauty, such artistry. But that doesn't mean capitalize on it, market it. That's not what that means, And that's not to say that, I have no idea how he's going to grow up. Whatever he chooses to do, that's his choice. But I can already tell that anyone who's experienced his innate musicality will urge him to become an artist. And so he's born into this like legacy of musical genius, and then might experience pressure to follow in the family's everything. They're amazing. So even if his passion is, I don't know, really for physics or astronomy or something, because that's how identity formation goes in those years. And so it's my hope, my wish, my dream that the adult expectations never overshadow this child's interests. But that's most often the case. A lot of adults, especially parents, kind of project some of their unfulfilled dreams onto their children. So the focus then on success and achievement, it can tend to kind of distort the young person's sense of self. And it makes their identity more about external validation or approval than about authentic growth. When I was coming up, children were seen and not heard. And we weren't necessarily taught to talk back. We knew how, but talking back usually got a backhand. So, we learned not to do that. But I can also tell you that I only rarely adhered to those rules. I am that's not right, that's not fair kind of person, and I always have been. And I love it. I love seeing it too. Give me a radicalized militant child. I love it. That 12-year-old who took down Mike, my pillow guy Lindell at the Democratic National Convention. Give me more kids like that. Because when we raise children to push back on nonsense that's harmful, we teach them other really healthy things like boundaries, and it gives them self-confidence, which needs to be nurtured, as does innovation and critical thinking. And so the arts, despite, maybe familial or even societal pressures, the arts are invaluable. Beyond learning techniques, right? Artists, we pick up so many other skills. I mean, they're called the soft skills, but still they're skills nonetheless, right? No judgment about soft and hard. I'm just saying the skills are like problem solving and teamwork, emotional intelligence. But then we also, through media and whatever else, we encounter stereotypes as well. The mentally ill, drugged out entertainer. And that has a way during our formative years of sticking with us. And maybe even too culturally, there may be an ushering towards maybe the use of substances in order to deal with emotions or to mask pain or to hide mental health issues, right? There's a lot of things that can happen at that time. And so there still needs to be an outlet. Every emotion has an expression. So how do we do that, right? And when we're forming that identity, plus we're in the arts, we can idolize some people who may have had mental illness or may have used substances or maybe a combination of both. And we think, wow, well, they're revered. Maybe that's okay for me to be like this, for me to deal with things in this way. And my gosh, that becomes a real harmful cliche, doesn't it? So we'll get more into that in a different episode. But overall, artists are not just here to entertain. We're contributors. We contribute in ways that a lot of people don't even realize. And it's not entirely society's fault. I'm reminded of Robin Williams, who may have been Hollywood's most depressed comedian of the 21st century. And audiences saw him as a funny man until they couldn't. But that stereotype, that identity kind of denied his total personhood. It was harmful. Dave Chappelle said something similar when he abruptly kind of canceled himself and absconded to Africa. That's part of the trap of being in front of audiences. They project things onto us that we may or may not be able to manage or combat. And so then we absorb it until we can't. And most of us don't really reach our breaking points until later in life. And so how can younger artists deal with these pressures in a practical way when we need jobs? And also we need validation. How do we maintain our integrity? One thing that my friends, have gone through various degree programs, like teachers, they rarely learn pedagogy, And I can identify because one of the things that artists rarely learn until they're thrown into it is entrepreneurship. We're not really taught how to be on the business side of our art. We're taught the craft. And then we have to kind of defer to managers or whoever else. But we spend most of our time honing our craft and thinking that people are going to see it, value it in the same way. And this is rarely the case. And it becomes really disheartening, really discouraging. And so that kind of working with people piece, that's often missing. And now that I think about it, we give audiences a lot of credit, don't we? Assuming that they can even recognize quality and want to pay for it. Because those are the same people who don't understand you, right? Let alone what you're doing and what it takes to do what you do. And we all know that feeling, when somebody looks at your art or your music or your acting and says, that's nice, that's cute, but when are you going to get a real job? And that stings, right? I used to think like, wow, this person must be so jealous that I'm not a 9-to-5er, because what else is meant by real job? What does that mean? Why does a paycheck have to be steady to be real? In today's society, real is whatever you can convince other people that it is. And what continues to be real is that society often expects us to give our talents away for exposure or experience, as if we're not worth paying. And just that aspect of it, because it happens repeatedly again and again, it can mess with our sense of self-worth, especially if we haven't had the time to define and solidify our self-worth, like many young artists have not. Now, mind you, I have had several real jobs while I was teaching music and gigging, right? So I was still performing, still teaching, and had these real jobs. And so I used a lot of those, soft skills, those transferable skills that I mentioned, working in like the legal department at Johnson & Johnson. For whatever reason, why they hired me, I still don't know. Working in an anesthesiology department at a medical university. One of 2 medical universities that I worked at, actually. So, hallelujah for transferable skills. But anyway, this example, it tells you that, not only was I holding down several revenue streams since my teens, but that's kind of, that's the hustle of an artist. No one can sit around and wait for opportunities to show up because, this isn't stranger than fiction. Part of my identity and skill set as an artist is my ability to create. Some of those other soft skills, right? Like I learned as a musician, active listening, empathy, collaboration. And as I was teaching, I found that I was using a lot of those, but also I'm teaching in inner city schools and community music schools. I was using more like social work skills than, my musical skills, quite honestly. And eventually, by working in those environments, I was honing a different skill set and later became a clinical social worker. So all of that kind of led to the same thing. But the start of it, the origin in music, helped me later when I was supervising a national runaway hotline where I needed to respond to crisis calls with compassion, coordinate care with law enforcement and anxious parents. Or even at a different point in life when I was doing event planning and realized an hour before the event started that we didn't have chairs for a sit-down dinner. Oh my God. I pulled out my problem-solving, teamwork, and adaptability skills. My youth in the arts prepared me for the experiences that I never could have envisioned. That sounds magical. I know it sounds like I'm saying that artists are magicians. And yes, we are quite magical. But the point is, we learn how to take different perspectives and make things work. Let's say harmoniously. There's a science to being an artist. But still, the societal expectation placed on artists to be magicians is unreal. And Long gone are the days of roaming minstrel singing and strumming for the toss of a coin. But that still seems to be somewhat of an expectation. And while I believe that a lot of that has to do with maybe the oversaturation of people who are talented doing things, a lot of people can create, but not everyone is a creative. Just like a lot of people can participate in the arts and not necessarily be an artist. And I don't want to start defining and narrowing who is and who isn't. I remember my harp teacher saying, practice doesn't make perfect. Practice makes permanent. And that was her way of saying, get it right the first time, because unlearning mistakes is a lot harder. And in a lot of ways, at that time, I could see that she was right. But then I started to even question what's a mistake and what's simply being an individual. I remember entering a young artist competition in my teens, and I chose to perform this piece that moved me, like literally, and when I would sway with my big ass instrument, right? And kind of like dancing with this large instrument. And this is not the right way to do things in the harp world, let me tell you. I did not look poised. I did not look genteel. It was elegant, of course, but I was also chair dancing. And now, obviously, I felt pressure to win, Very few people enter a competition and say, I'm here to lose. So the goal is to win. And you know what? I didn't. I didn't win the main prize. I won the Audience's Choice award. So the audience dug it. Word. But the judges were evaluating me based on criteria that I just wasn't in the mood to observe that day. I felt tired of playing the role. And I also have rarely felt prouder of myself than when I performed for a competition the way that I perform at private recitals. Like, my authenticity was on full display. I was fully present. And that was one of the greatest gifts that I could give to myself, instead of adhering to the pressure. That's why I say that the arts, despite all of the pressure, is still a valuable pursuit. Artists, we've got the technical mastery. We work so hard at that for hours and hours, for years. Maybe this is what makes artists and arts creators just vastly superior. I'm kidding. Kind of. But seriously, what other field intersects with so many other areas? The arts are universal. Do I sound dreamy? You can tell how much I love creatives and artists. And I can kind of separate those two. I did a little earlier. I should probably explain what I'm doing. Creative people, they have the ability to create new things or new ideas. And they use that ability to create like new stories. That's amazing. They're inventors. And they usually have a lot of emotional intelligence. These are the songwriters and the music producers, the developers in the arts. They aren't necessarily the artists, though. Artists, they're provocative. They provoke emotional responses. And they use different things, with their imagination, the use of symbols and movement. It's amazing. I was talking to somebody about an old chamber music score that I found, the music of George Crumb. And if you can, just Google it. It looks like visual art, just twisting and turning on the page. And I sometimes wonder how, with our kind of formal education, when we're not just, going through school and doing something extracurricular as a hobby, but when we really focus on the arts. How does a young artist get there to that unapologetic self-expression when there's so much pressure during the formative years to conform? How do we get to this George Crumb making a peace symbol out of staves and notes? This is clearly atypical, and it works, right? But anybody else who would try to do that, oh, you're wrong, you're not doing things the right way, this is blah, blah, blah. How do we get there? There's a lot of pressure, that conformity, right? And that can start to change how we see ourselves. And when we start to do that, when we start to box ourselves in, and I don't mean skip over learning the basics. Get your foundation solid, learn what the rules are and then break them. That's the expression, right? And I get that. But when, right? And how do you get people to pay for it? You start breaking the rules. It becomes unfamiliar to them. And they're like, wow, that's not what I expected. That's not, how it should go. I don't want to pay for that. I started playing the harp when I was 7, and I loved classical music because, Looney Tunes, the cartoons, all at that time had classical scores. But I don't know that other people heard it the same way that I heard it. They would watch the cartoons and it was funny and that was cool and I could share that with my friends. But they didn't necessarily see the music as yet another character. But I did. And it made me feel part of a select group that could, right? Very inclusive. But obviously, since it didn't resonate with my peers of my community, kind of excluded me, felt a little alienating. And I remember practicing quietly at home, just afraid that my neighbors would hear and judge me for playing what they called white people's music. And my family friends would ask, oh, can you play some jazz or something on that thing? And that stands out to me, that question, because it was a not good enough statement underneath. And I felt a lot of shame for loving this music. The shame was intense. And all I really wanted to do was play the music that resonated with me. And I loved the music and I loved my instrument. I remember touring the Lion and Healy Harp Factory in Chicago, and there were 4 floors. Visitors were allowed to see kind of like the making of these amazing instruments by the people, like by hand, right? Who carefully assembled each part. On the tour, it started on the 4th floor with access via like an industrial lift, And the elevator operator, his name was Sam. And he became familiar with me each time I visited because I would go there a lot. I liked it. I loved it. But on my first visit, I remember his face. He smiled back at me, right? As I beamed with excitement. I was so excited to go and check out how they do this. I'm always so interested in how things work. And I also remember him giving my hand a little gentle squeeze when he saw me tearing up as we arrived back to the ground level. That's the love, that's the passion that I had for that instrument, The issue was the damn people. I'd go to these harp recitals, right? And I'm surrounded by just a sea of blondes and brunettes. And I was so out of place, y'all. And it felt unacceptable. So I did my best, especially in my teens when fitting in is what everybody wants to do. I did my best to adapt to the situation. Today we know it is code switching, especially in speech, but in the 80s and 90s, people just called it talking white. And I was too white for my community and I was too black for the classical world. And all I really wanted to do was play the music that I loved. But identity confusion, it hit me hard. By high school, that wanting to fit in, can't fit in, exacerbated different symptoms, depression, a lot of anxiety. And it got so bad that I started dissociating. And by college, this one memory stands out. I was at a party and a friend put on some music because, classical music nerds listen to classical music at parties. That's what we do. And I remember saying like, wow, who is this? This harpist is amazing. And my friend looked at me and was like, that's you. I had no memory of ever playing that piece. And it hit me. How long had I been going through life without really being present, because just the present felt so painful to be a part of? The mental health struggles, the addiction, it all stemmed from this identity confusion. Who am I supposed to be? Who am I? Where will I feel accepted? Where do I belong? I'd been winning international competitions since I was 8, right? But as I grew older, winning came with even more complications. And some of my, peers would kind of dismiss my accomplishments as the result of like affirmative action. Others just envied me. It was fine. But my single parent, my mom, she was just scraping by. And I was constantly reminded that this was my job, to perform, not just to perform, but to win, because usually winning came with money. So the anxiety consumed me and the dissociating just got worse. But I still loved orchestral music, and there's nothing, any symphonic players out there can tell you, there is nothing that can compare to sitting on stage with 100 other people and instruments, co-creating these waves of sound, feeling the energy reverberating up through the floors. Holy shit, it's just exhilarating. And because of that feeling, I kept pursuing it. I loved it. The few chamber groups that I was in, the operas, all the things, there was just, if I really felt it and was creating, these feelings with people who I enjoyed playing with, it didn't feel like work. It was wonderful. But unfortunately, it was also rare. I thought that, I could bypass the elitism and the racism, but I was wrong. For me, at least, the politics and the artistry were inseparable. I remember my harp teacher, who to this day, I think is the only Black woman to have a principal chair in a major symphony orchestra. She was there for over 40 years. And she told me a story about her colleagues asking if she knew how to fry chicken. The racism that I encountered was different, but no less blatant, right? And even though we kind of different generations, but experiencing something similar, and she still couldn't help me navigate it necessarily. Some things that she had kind of built up the resilience to manage, I hadn't, I remember standing with the 2 other Black kids in one of my youth orchestras, and we were discussing a piece that we were learning. One kid, a bassist, isolated a few bars that would have made this like tight beat, right? This loop, if we were to sample it for hip hop tracks. And clearly this is the 90s, so hip hop is everything. And we started making this beat using this composer's rhythm, and we were laughing and dancing to it. And we were having so much fun with our shared love of this 19th century composer, when this other conductor from a different youth ensemble walked by and reprimanded us for what he interpreted as, I don't know, desecrating the sanctity of this classical piece. I have no idea, but he shamed us for daring to embrace what we so clearly loved. And the conclusion that I drew in that moment, I was incensed, and I said something smart back, because I told you that's who I am. I have a lot of fire in my natal chart. But after I said what I said, and he skulked off or whatever, then my little friend group kind of disbanded, completely deflated, and completely aware that we were only there to imitate, not to integrate. And I still get emotional thinking about that, about the juxtaposition of the joy and the reality check at such a formative moment in our identity. And that message, that this doesn't belong to me, it rattled around in my mind for years, to the point where I wrote my first master's thesis chronicling 400 years of the Black experience in classical music. That was my big middle finger. And that's the validation and reclamation of my authentic identity. It took years for me to get there, but I got there. And getting there meant also identifying and reconciling the other overlapping intersections of my other identities, right? No one walks the same path. But here on this podcast, we're going to become familiar with the impact of these collisions on young artists and discuss multiple ways to grow in healthy ways. That's what's coming up. Here's a sneak peek, though, something that I learned. It is possible to balance who you are with the demands of the world around you. One of the keys is remembering that you yourself, just as you are valuable. That sounds a little cheesy, like you'd find it on a pillow, but it's not an empty platitude, because what I'm saying is that this isn't about needing approval. It's about knowing your worth and making sure that whatever exchange you are participating in is fair and balanced and honest. People will judge you, yeah, but their opinions are not facts, okay? And you are so much more than what you do. I can't wait for you to join me again. Until then, take good care.
Thank you for listening to Rebuilding the Artist. We hope today's conversation left you feeling inspired, connected, and more in tune with your creative self. Remember, this journey is about progress, not perfection. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with fellow artists who need to hear these stories. You can also follow us on Instagram at Kimura Wellness for more insights and updates. That's Kimura Wellness, Khemura Wellness. Join us next time as we continue to explore what it means to rebuild and heal as an artist. Until then, keep creating, keep questioning, and above all, keep showing up for yourself. You are the artist. You are the storyteller of your life.